What's up, guys? This is Technical Tim here, and this is a UFC off week, and so I'm just gonna talk about a little betting nuance. On my 3 playlists that I currently have on the channel, one of them is Technical on Betting Nuance, and I did one on single legs the other day, and the advice I pointed out on that does still take a level of skill. Like, coming from a wrestling background, I might be a little, even after watching that video, you may not be able to spot some of those issues right off the bat, but it's something you can work on. But the thing I'm about to mention, and the advice I'm about to mention in this video, is something that you can implement immediately, and just as effective as I do now. You'll be on par with me immediately if you just kind of go by the advice that I tell you. So you'll be able to use this tool immediately. So I want to talk about narratives in just kind of mainstream sports media and narratives in betting, and why sometimes I think this is the main thing that separates a good bettor and a casual bettor, in my opinion. And I don't mean it to be condescending, because I fell victim to narratives just early in life and even early in my betting career. But now I have a system and just a very hard-nosed attitude in place towards it to make sure that it doesn't mess with me anymore, and it doesn't creep into my picks. So what do I mean by narrative? So if you grew up in America or anywhere, you notice that mainstream sports media really will focus on stories. Because, I mean, look at us. We all love movies. We all love TV shows. It's just intriguing to listen to stories. And in sports, you can prize stories out, but sometimes they're manufactured, and they're not. It doesn't always explain what actually happened in a sporting competition. A good example of this is just think of like a basketball game. You'll hear mainstream sports media, even like ESPN First Take, and I'm not knocking these guys. They do it for a reason, and it's because not everyone understands the X's and O's. So they focus on narrative and kind of hyperbole to bring in an audience. So I get it, but that doesn't mean we have to fall for it for betting. But just like with LeBron James, and like a basketball game, sometimes you'd always hear like they wanted it more, that team wanted it more, and it's like that's probably not why they actually won the game. They probably won because of the X's and O's. Maybe I know nothing about basketball, so like don't know shit. But maybe it was the actual defensive schemes that the victorious team was using, and there's not enough mention on that. And because I think we've been fed with this for so long, we tend to do that in other sports as well, and even in MMA. And and then coming to our sport, MMA media, look at all the stories. Like, I mean, I can't really, like, I like to listen to like Technique and other things, and I love a good story here and there, but if you watch a lot of the mainstream MMA media shows, and they're doing it the same way. I'm not blaming them or anything and saying they're bad people, but they will, everything's about like Conor McGregor or Ronda Rousey in the WWE and all that stuff, right? So there's a lot of focus on narrative. So as a bettor, you can take advantage of it, because usually the narrative is not what wins a fight or a sporting competition, but now I'm going to focus on fights. It's usually the technique in the cage and abilities that win fights. Narratives, could they matter? Maybe sometimes, but usually not. And a great rebuttal to what I'm saying is a lot of people are like, well, you can't measure narratives. So like, or you can't measure heart. You can't measure the heart of a fighter or something. And it's like, no, I agree. And because you can't measure it, you shouldn't waste your time measuring it. Maybe it does matter, but we can't measure it. So let's focus on something we can measure. Striking statistics, takedown ability, cardio, guard retention, things like that. That's what we really have to focus on. So that's kind of my main spiel for that. And now I'm gonna just use examples of when commonly commonly used narratives that go into fights that not only does the mainstream media hit, but you'll see bettors on forums use it all the time. And I'm going to kind of just suggest solutions to certain type of narratives. One of them, motivation. You hear this one a lot. A big example of it, Ronda Rousey when she lost to Holly Holm. A lot of people are like, oh, she's too busy doing other things, blah, blah, blah. And people were using that as the excuse as to why she lost. Funny story, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but before I got into MMA betting, the Rousey Holm fight was one of the first fights that I really analyzed from a betting perspective, and I wasn't betting yet, and I picked Holly Holm to win this fight. So, like, I swear, I picked her straight up to my friend Mikey. You can vouch for me if you're watching this. But it wasn't motivation or lack of motivation of Rousey that lost her that fight. It's the fact that it was technique. It was her takedowns. One, her striking's not good, and she runs into counter shots. And two, her takedown. And this is why I knew she wasn't going to win. Her takedowns are upper body focused, and they're not lower body focused. And Holly Holm is really good in the clinch and fighting off underhooks, and is really strong in the clinch. And I said she's gonna not get taken down, and she's gonna batter her with counters, and that's what happened. But then you heard after the fight, and still to this day, people will talk about how Rousey just her head wasn't right, blah blah blah. And maybe that's true. I don't know, but I tend to think usually it's not. I think if she had the ability to win that fight, she would have just beat her like she did everyone else, but beat Holly like she beat everyone else. But there's just too much focus on the narrative, and you can't measure that. We don't know how motivated she is before or after a fight or anything. So why waste your time kind of trying to determine it? You should focus on the X's and O's, because that's something we can measure as bettors. Another one, and this one, and another motivation narrative, and this is kind of like an example, a more recent example, and you could see it maybe both ways. A lot of people were talking about Ray Borg going through a lot of out of the cage issues, and I feel really bad for the guy. I think his son, if I am reciting this correctly, is going through a really tough time. So he has a lot of out of the cage issues. If you watch my preview on that fight, I never once brought that up, because I don't know if it's going to affect him or not, and it usually doesn't. Usually we usually see like a pretty common product from fighters fight to fight. You'll see improvements or deviations here and there, but generally and statistically, it will usually be pretty close to what they usually are. And so on stuff like that for motivation, I tend to just assume like with Ray Borg, I just assume he's going to be an average version of himself. Just maybe whenever there's an out of the cage issue, because I don't want to waste my time not looking into the wrestling and things like that and have a narrative keep me away from making a good pick. And the funny thing is, if he had won that fight and looked really impressively, the funny thing is the media would have said, oh, he won because he was inspired by his son. And that's kind of, maybe he is inspired by his son to win the fight, but his skills have to win the fight. I could be really inspired to go beat the shit out of Floyd Mayweather in a boxing match, but I don't have the skills to do that. And conversely, if he wants to wrestle with me in a pure wrestling match, he has to gain 20 years of experience to be able to compete with me in that field too. And I'm never going to be able to outbox Floyd Mayweather no matter how motivated I am. And then another one, and this one's trickier, and this one I can see why even really intelligent bettors can let this creep into their betting analysis, because it's more effective on the fight probably. But if you really look at it, is it really layoffs? When people haven't fought for a really long time, people are like, oh, well, they're going to be rusty and everything. And I'm going to use a common example, Ben Rothwell. I picked Ben Rothwell I thought he probably won that fight, close fight, but I picked him, got it wrong, but everyone was afraid of the layoff for him, and that's why some people were kind of backing off picking him. But I did the same little solution that I use for motivation narrative solutions, is just assume he's going to be an average version of himself. Even on layoffs, you don't see people looking all that terrible or all that better. You can find some exceptions here and there, but generally they kind of look like themselves. And even John Jones, I mean, he had a layoff versus Gustafsson, and then fought Gustafsson, looked really good. He had one versus OSP, and I tend to think he looked better going against OSP than other people think. I mean, that's kind of just a typical John Jones fight. If he doesn't put you away, he's going to volume you up and get takedowns on you. So that's kind of my advice for this, is don't let narratives and kind of non-technique and non-ability things make you make bad decisions, because it can happen. And I've fallen victim to it before, but I haven't for a long time, because I always have the attitude of focus on things that you can measure, because that's what you can control from a betting point of view. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope that made sense, and I hope that's really helpful for you. Please like the video or subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for listening. And don't fall victim to the narrative. Focus on what you can measure, and you're going to be a successful bettor if you do that. So thank you. Bye.